is that we should have been opening another show, because there's always a last minute thing, like a theater or something, whenever we do one of these events. And we've already postponed this one once. And let's see, I don't look like I'm looking at the camera, do I? And we got out some publicity, and this will always be there as an archive. But I'm really very happy, because it's not very often that our guest, who we can now see, is the current winner of the National Book Award. So, Barbara?
Yeah,
Okay, there we are. Hi, Charlie.
Hi there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, I had the pleasure of interviewing you. I think it was through the Julie Ertl, right? At Tor?
Julie Ertl is actually at Vintage.
Oh, pardon me, Vintage is your publisher here. And that was November?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seems like it was forever ago and yesterday.
Yeah.
But about 10 days after we recorded that interview for radio, we didn't do a video of it. Right. We ended up. See, I am not yet ready. My brain is dead. Came the announcement that you were this year's National Book Award recipient for fiction.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking.
How did you have any, I don't know their process. Are you notified that you're shortlisted or anything before they make an announcement? What was the experience for you?
Yeah, I was notified of being shortlisted. So they do it in stages, which I thought was very exciting, but also nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
There was a long list of 10 for each category that came out in mid-September. And that was, I remember, getting texts early morning from my, my close friends in publishing, which are my agent and my editors at Pantheon and Vintage, and just, it was unbelievable, so that already felt like, okay, how did this happen? And then about 3 weeks later, they announced the short list, and I was on that too, and that was even more shocking. So that was 5 titles, 5 books, and then the ceremony was in November, as you said, and we did it all through Zoom. Normally it'd be in New York, at this kind of fancy black tie gala, basically. So we didn't get to go to that, but it was pretty neat because it was in my living room and my family was all around, and the chair of the fiction committee, Roxane Gay, announced the finalists, and there's music playing, and then all of a sudden she said, the title of my book, and I just lost it. I kind of lost my mind. My son was next to me. He was sort of screaming. My wife was, screaming. My daughter was upstairs watching on a different computer. We just all kind of collectively lost our minds for about 20 minutes.
I'm surprised you've been able to get it back yet. How has that changed your life?
In every way, and also not at all. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of.
That's a great answer. I hope it changed your agent's life a whole lot.
Well, she certainly put up with a lot over the years. When I started writing this book, we had just started working together at that time, and it was 2013 actually. It was 2013. So I had started writing the book prior, and it just took forever. My kids were little, now they're middle schoolers, and my wife watched me, write so many versions of this and question what I was doing with my life, and she had to sort of talk me off the ledge a few times. Yeah, so it felt like at many times, I'll never finish this book. Why am I doing this to myself? No one's gonna want to read it. And then this happened, and it's like, it's brought a lot of more attention to the book, obviously, and it's provided opportunities to talk to people like you, and read and do readings and some public speaking. So that's really exciting.
Although you were already doing those when I interviewed you for the radio in November, because I had mentioned that I had you on the radio show Hour of the Wolf one week,
Right.
and the next week would be Karen Russell.
Yeah.
And by the way, our reader next month for NYRSF readings is Karen Russell.
Yeah.
So this is a pattern where, like, if every time I get one of you, I get the other.
I like that.
Would be
I like being tied to Karen Russell in any way. That's not a bad thing at all.
Yeah, and I should mention, by the way, because I just got confirmation, see everybody, that, okay, so today, February 23rd, Charles you. Because things have been crazy, usually we're the first Tuesday of every month, and we will revert to that in April. But next month will be March 23rd, will be Karen Russell, and then April 6th, it is confirmed, will be Alana C. Myers. So that's so far a nice lineup, and we'll have ACYs whichever month her book, which is a Peter Pan kind of thing, comes out. Now, right now, your publicists, publishers, and even Tor, who I misnamed, are yelling at me, what's the name of this guy's book?
Oh.
And it's Interior Chinatown.
Right. Sorry.
Which is just a wonderful read. Actually, we can do better than that. Barbara, if you will. Barbara Krasnoff is our engineer today, and Amy Goldschlager is our audience wrangler. So when people have questions, there you go. There. So, yeah, we can do a nice job displaying one picture at a time. It seems like if we do two, we throw people off the software. Well, we can go back on that. So, at this point in total, how many books have you
written?
How to Live in a Science Fictional Universe.
Right. That was right. So I've written 2 novels and 2 short story collections.
Wow.
Yeah, I've written 4 books. I've been writing fiction for 20 years now. I started in 2001, right when I became a lawyer. And, for many years, I was doing both. So until a few years ago, I stopped being a lawyer.
And the books are something to fall back on, as it were.
Yeah, they weren't even. Yeah, they were not quite that even. I mean, for most years, it was either I hadn't finished a book, or even when I had, the book wouldn't be enough to sort of rely on for income. So, so it was a good thing to always, or for me anyway, I never really had to think about writing as like my livelihood until I did. But for most years, I wrote whatever I wanted. And so I wrote that book you mentioned, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, which is a time travel story about a guy whose dad invented time machines in his garage. He invented the first kind of rudimentary time machine. And then so this guy grows up and he's now a time machine repairman, and his dad goes missing. So he's got to go back into his own childhood and find his dad, basically, who's lost in his own life. So I wrote that book, and then many years went by, and I wrote this book. In between, there was a story collection, also from Pantheon and Vintage. So, yeah.
And lots of short stories in any number of the better magazines. I know I saw your name passing by over at Lightspeed.
Yep. I had a story in Lightspeed in 2010, which was really exciting. And I've worked with John Joseph Adams there on a number of anthologies. He's always like nice enough to invite me to contribute to anthologies. So I've done a few of those over the years. And then he invited me to be the guest editor for Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy one year in 2017. So
yeah,
he was, he's the series editor, and I was that year's editor. So that was.
And by the way of disclosure, I work for John as an audio editor. I'm the host of the Lightspeed Magazine podcast and audio editor of Nightmare and Fantasy Magazine. So we have 6 podcasts going out a month through Skybook Media for John Joseph Adams.
I don't know how he does it all. I just assume there's actually like he has 2 clones, because he seems really like, he's editing books, he's editing stories, he's running websites.
Yeah, well, he actually does have a bunch of people that he works with, including his wife, Christy Yant, who is now co-editing, I think it's Nightmare Magazine with Arlie Sorg. No, Nightmare's taken over by Wendy Wagner. Her first issue just came out. They're doing Fantasy Magazine.
Arlie Sorg, yeah.
Which in the background here, behind the green curtain, Amy Goldschlager was so kind to correct me, as she so often likes to do. Now, speaking of the different things, making a living between being a lawyer and a couple of novels and the short story collections, you were also doing, have been, and will be continue to be doing a hell of a lot of TV work.
Yeah, I have. It's
a little thing called Westworld.
Yeah, little show.
Legion.
You've heard of that show? Small show. No, that was. So yeah, I guess the periods of my chronology, I guess, were 2001 to 2014, writing stories and books, working as a lawyer. And when I published How to Live Safely in 2010, I started working with a TV and film agent. And that was sort of the beginning of me having some introduction into that world. I live in Southern California, so it made it a little bit easier, although it's possible, especially now that everyone's used to Zooming, I think it's possible to do meetings even if you don't live in LA. But at the time we lived in LA proper, or Santa Monica anyway. So I started to, through my agents, they started to send me on meetings with TV and film people. These general meetings, usually it's sort of like you have a nice conversation and you drink a bottle of water and you think, okay, that was nice. I met a nice person. They said nice things about my writing. And then usually I'd go home and think, oh, I have to pitch this person something. What do I pitch them? And so a few times I tried, and that just never seemed to go anywhere. So I just thought, well, these meetings are fun. I'm not really sure what they're for. But I think, what I found out is that it really is to sort of meet people, and so that you've established a personal connection. And after a couple of years, I met an executive at HBO named David Levine, and I think that's how I ended up getting in the mix for the Westworld job. I can't imagine any other way I did, because one day I got a call out of the blue when I was working, at a tech company as a lawyer, and they were just like, "Do you want to come interview for this Westworld job?" And I thought, yeah, sure. I mean, that sounds amazing. I'm not going to get this job. I mean, why would they hire me? I've never written, for TV, or I've never even really written a script. I had privately tried my hand at it, but like no one, those will never see the light of day. Those are pretty terrible. So I thought, how could I possibly get this job? But they ended up hiring me onto Westworld for the first season, and I mean, it was pretty great. It was scary. I was leaving the law. I have a family. My wife and I were just thinking, this is a pretty big risk, but through the Writers Guild, I could get insurance, health insurance, and it was going to be a steady paycheck for at least a year. So I thought, well, that works. Maybe not a year. I think at that point, all they guaranteed was about 6 months.
Yeah, a season.
Yeah. So, but it since then, I've worked on a bunch of other shows, including Legion for Noah Hawley, who is really brilliant, and worked for Alan Ball, who created 6 Feet Under and True Blood. I worked on a show called Here and Now that was on HBO. That was really a great experience. And Lodge 49 on AMC, which was created by another fiction writer, Jim Gavin. That was a lot of fun. Jim is a really talented writer. And another sci-fi story, Dream Corp LLC on Adult Swim, if anyone's familiar with it. Created by a guy named Daniel Stessen, who's just such an original guy, and executive produced by Stephen Merchant and John Krasinski. So some really, amazing, creative, funny people involved. And so I got to write on that show for a little bit and try that out. So, one other show, Sorry for Your Loss. That was on Facebook Watch. I wrote on the second season of that. Stars Elizabeth Olsen as a young widow who's sort of coping with the loss of her husband. It was created by Kit Steinkellner. So I've worked for all these really talented TV writers and showrunners for the last 6 years.
It seems to be Elizabeth Olsen's TV persona at this point is
yeah, it's true.
grieving.
I was thinking, my son and I have been watching WandaVision every week, and I was like, that's yeah.
I'm enjoying that so much.
Grieving thing going on between those two roles.
Yeah. Now, what the next obvious question is when we're going to start seeing your stories on the screen, but I'm not going to ask yet because I think if you're willing, now's a great time for you to read. Now, are you reading for us out of Interior Chinatown, or do you have something else selected?
Well, I have options, and I remember we talked about it. So, yeah,
that's right.
What would you prefer? Because now I'm blanking on what your preference is.
Well, time has a lot to do with it. So I would prefer like 15 to 20 minutes that are preferably slightly self-contained, but something longer, something shorter. Self-contained is the important part to me, so that people sort of get, or a great cliffhanger. That's also good.
No, I've got something self-contained, and I think it times out right, but I hesitate to say that because whenever I read live, I have a tendency to speed up.
A lot of writers do. When we do the New York Review of Science Fiction readings live, in person as they're supposed to be, I always have this, or on Hour of the Wolf, I always have this impulse to hold up a huge sign that says, "Slow down."
Yeah. I will try to remember to keep it slow so that I can be understood. But I'm going to a story that's actually out in an anthology called Speculative Los Angeles.
Okay.
And it's from Akashic Books, I think. I should know that. It is. Edited by Denise Hamilton. And so the idea was to write speculative stories that somehow have a connection to LA or Southern California, I think.
Yeah, there's a Washington D.C. spec fic book that really is spec fic,
Hmm.
although I don't think it could have gotten as weird as it has in the last month or so. Excuse me, 4 years or so. Uh, there's another book called Newer York,
Ooh, I think I've heard of that one.
and there's an old one for Boston. So now there's one for LA, which LA was due, I would say. So, having said that, even though you'll be reading not from Interior Chinatown while you're reading, we're going to put a little icon of the book cover because I think it looks cool.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So if you're going to put that, then maybe I should read. I prepared both.
Yeah, it's author's choice. It really
I'm throwing
is.
everything off here, aren't I? I completely bungled this, even though you prepared me for it. Well, I'll read a section that does time out at about 17 minutes from Interior Chinatown, since you'll have it up, and then I feel like it's pretty self-contained.
And also, it's the book of the moment,
Yeah.
as it were. As long as you're, as long as a recent award winner.
Sorry for the whiplash there, but let's stick to the plan. I apologize. All right. Well, I'm going to read from Interior Chinatown. This book is about a guy named Willis Wu, and he lives in a very strange sort of universe, which I won't spoil since you're about to hear it, but it's basically it's sort of like the Twilight Zone meets Law and Order. This is the dimension that Willis exists in. Right. So, Interior Chinatown. Interior Golden Palace. Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu Guy. You are not Kung Fu Guy. You are currently background Oriental male, but you've been practicing. Maybe tomorrow will be the day. Interior Golden Palace. Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu Guy. You are not Kung Fu Guy. You are currently Oriental Guy making a weird face, but you've been practicing. Maybe tomorrow will be the day. Take what you can get. Try to build a life at the margin, made from bit parts. Willis Wu, Asian actor. Skills: Kung Fu, moderate proficiency. Fluent in accented English. Able to do face of great shame on command. Resume, repertoire. Disgraced son. Delivery guy. Silent henchman. Caught between two worlds. Guy who runs in and gets kicked in the face. Striving immigrant. Generic Asian man. Your mother has played, in no particular order, Pretty Oriental Flower. Asiatic seductress. Young dragon lady. Slightly less young dragon lady. Restaurant hostess. Girl with the almond eyes. Beautiful maiden, number one. Dead beautiful maiden, number one. Old Asian woman. Your father has been, at various times, twin dragon, wizened Chinaman, guy in a soiled t-shirt, inscrutable grocery owner in a soiled t-shirt, egg roll cook, young Asian man, Sifu, the mysterious kung fu master, old Asian man. Interior Golden Palace, morning. In the world of black and white, everyone starts out as generic Asian man. Everyone who looks like you, anyway. Unless you're a woman, in which case you start out as pretty Asian woman. You all work at Golden Palace, formerly Jade Palace, formerly Palace of Good Fortune. There's an aquarium in the front, and cloudy tanks of rock crabs and 2-pound lobsters crawling over each other in the back. Laminated menus offer the lunch special, which comes with a bowl of fluffy white rice and choice of soup, egg drop or hot and sour. A neon Qingdao sign blinks and buzzes behind the bar in the dimly lit space, a dropped ceiling room with lacquered ornate woodwork, or some imitation thereof. Everything simmering in a warm, seedy red glow, thrown off by the dollar store paper lanterns festooned above, many of them darkened by dead moths, the paper yellowing, ripped, curling in on itself. The bar is fully stocked with top shelf spirits up top, middle shelf liquor at eye level, and down at the bottom, a happy hour shelf of booze that you will regret for sure. The new thing everyone is excited about is called the Lychee Margarita Teeny, which seems like a lot of flavors. Not that you've had one. They're $14. Sometimes patrons leave a sip at the bottom of the glass, and if you're quick, while you go through the swinging door that separates the front of the house from the back, you can have a taste. You've seen some of the other generic Asian men do it. It's a risk, though. The director's always got an eye out, ready to fire someone for the smallest infraction. You wear the uniform, white shirt, black pants, black slipper-like shoes that have no traction whatsoever. Your haircut is not good, to say the least. Black and white always look good. A lot of it has to do with the light. They're the heroes. They get hero lighting, designed to hit their faces just right. Designed to hit White's face just right, anyway. Someday, you want the light to hit your face like that. To look like the hero. Or, for a moment, to actually be the hero. Roles. First, you have to work your way up. Starting from the bottom, it goes background Oriental male, dead Asian man, generic Asian man number 3/delivery guy, generic Asian man number 2/waiter, and generic Asian man number 1. And then, if you make it that far, hardly anyone does, you get stuck at number 1 for a while and hope and pray for the light to find you, and that when it does, you'll have something to say. And when you say that something, it'll come out just right and have everyone in black and white turning their heads saying, "Wow, who is that?" That is not just some generic Asian man. That is a star. Maybe not a real, regular star. Let's not get crazy. We're talking about Chinatown. But perhaps a very special guest star, which for your people is the ceiling, is the terminal, ultimate, exalted position for any Asian working in this world. The thing every Oriental male dreams of when he's in the background trying to blend in. Kung Fu Guy. Kung Fu Guy is not like the other slots in the hierarchy. There isn't always someone occupying the position, as in whoever the top guy is at any given time, that's the default guy who gets trotted out whenever there's kung fu to be done. No, only a very special Asian can be worthy of the title. It takes years of dedication and sacrifice, and after all that, only a few have even a slim chance of making it. Despite the odds, you all grew up training for this and only this. All the scrawny yellow boys up and down the block dreaming the same dream. Interior Golden Palace. Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu Guy. You are still not Kung Fu Guy. You are currently generic Asian man number 3/delivery guy. Your kung fu is B plus on a good day. And Sifu once proclaimed your drunken monkey to be nearly at a level of competence that he could, perhaps, at some point in the future, imagine not being completely embarrassed of you. Which, if you know him, that's a pretty big deal. To be honest, though, it can sometimes be hard to tell with Sifu, who is famously inscrutable. If you could only show him what you've become. All you want is for him to make that face, the one that looks like internal distress, possibly of a gastrointestinal nature, but actually indicates something closer to deeply repressed secret pride honorable father has for his young but promising son, means deliciously bittersweet pain that comes from knowing honorable teacher is no longer needed. That's how you see it in your head. He would make that face, smile, you'd smile back. Credits roll and you'd walk off arm in arm to the horizon. Old Asian man. These days, he is mostly old Asian man. No longer Sifu with the pants and the muscles and the look in his eye. All of that is gone now. But when did it happen? Over years and overnight. The day you first noticed. You'd shown up a few minutes early for weekly lesson. Maybe that's what threw him off. When he answered the door, it took him a moment to recognize you. 2 seconds, or 20. A frozen eternity. And then, as he regained himself, his familiar scowl, barking your name. Willis Wu! Half exclamation, half confirmation. As if verifying for both you and himself that he hadn't forgotten. Willis Wu, he said again. Well, come on. What are you doing? Don't just stand there in the doorway like a dum-dum. Come in, son. Let's get started. He was fine for the rest of the day, mostly, but you couldn't stop thinking about the look he gave you, oblivion or terror. And for the first time, you noticed the mess his room had become. Not unusual for any other man his age, living alone, but for Sifu, who taught and valued order and simplicity in all things. To have allowed his dwelling to reach this state of disorganization should have been a warning sign to all. Maybe not the first, but the first one that came to your attention. Fatty Choi went around telling everyone that Sifu was on food stamps, saying, how gullible can you be? You idiots think being wizened Chinaman pays well? Are you crazy? Why do you think he fishes bottles and cans out of the trash? But no one wanted to believe it, at least in public. In private, the thought did occur. Sifu never had the lights on. He said it was to train the senses. He saved everything. Disposable chopsticks, free glossy calendars from East-West Bank, good for wrapping fish or fruit. Packets of soy sauce and chili paste from the Dollar Chinese down the street. He'd patched his old fake leather couch so many times there were cracks on the patches, which of course he also patched. The Formica two-top he ate on was the first and only kitchen table he'd ever bought, purchased for $7.50 from the salvage bin at the old restaurant supply warehouse down on Jackson and 8th. That place long gone now, converted to interior rave/grimy club zine. But the table's still there in the kitchen. An artifact of the previous century, it had worn down to a smoothness so comforting and cool it felt soft to the touch. The patterns of use, hundreds, thousands of meals together in the corner of that small, low-ceilinged room. The surface preserving the teachings of Sifu, wisdom over time, recorded in the warp and wear, in the markings of the modest table itself. Come to think of it, Fatty Choi, despite the fact that he was and had always been a total gasbag, a mostly insufferable, close-talking blowhard, made all the more insufferable by the fact that he was not infrequently right about things, was simply stating what you all knew, but didn't want to admit. Sifu had gotten old. It was easy to lie to yourself about it. Although naively you believed he had, by some miracle of genetics and sheer follicular willpower, managed to reach the end of his 7th decade without a single hair turning gray. In hindsight, you remember once seeing an empty box of natural seaweed coloring in his wastebasket, Sifu emerging from his room with the occasional smear where he'd gotten a little careless and ended up painting the top edge of his forehead a swath of kelpish green. And even if he could still break a cinder block with 3 fingers, that was nothing compared to back in the day, his younger self, when he could do it with just one, a single powerful blow of any digit. You pick. You couldn't bear to watch, peeking through your fingers when you were little, and as you got older, still wincing in expectation of painful failure. But young Sifu never failed. He always found the necessary reserves of qi, was able to summon forth from whatever intangible reservoir the required force to smash through it, and everyone gathered around would clap and shout their praise at the latest demonstration of Sifu's mind over matter, mental and physical. An impossible feat right there in the alley, behind the kitchen, in the middle of a Tuesday. At the sound of the exploding energy, you would uncover your eyes and exhale with relief, proud and grateful that he had done it once again, hadn't mangled his hand. And also, you were slightly ashamed by your lack of faith, when everyone else, the assembled friends and strangers, had never doubted him in the slightest. Your earliest memories of him as a young dragon, a rising star, thick, straight hair the color of night, combed slowly and carefully straight back in a lustrous wave. Forearms like steel barrels lifting you out of the makeshift playpen in the corner of the room and flying you up around above his head, almost crashing into the bed and the lamp and the ceiling as you laughed and laughed until your mother said, "That's enough, Ming, please stop before he gets sick." And he'd do one more revolution before setting you down safely, your feet back on solid ground, the world still spinning. Whether we admitted to it or not, and sometimes you did admit to it yourself, right before falling asleep, in the way thoughts like this come to you, your first, best, and only real master, the source of all your kung fu knowledge, was no longer himself. He had aged out of his role and into the next one, his life force depleting with every exertion, wisdom and power leaking from him with each passing day and night. He had played his role for so long, he lost himself in it. Before some separation that happened gradually over decades, and then you waking one day to feel it, some distance that had crept in overnight, some space you could no longer cross. He'd always be your father, but somehow was no longer your dad. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
And there we go. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Okay. So again, in case anybody didn't pick up on it, the novel is Interior Chinatown. The author is Charles Yu. That's Y-U on the end. And it's vintage.
Yes.
Correct?
Pantheon. Yeah. Sorry.
All right. No, I'm far more interested in whatever you have to say.
Pantheon is the hardcover, and then Vintage published the paperback. They're, part of the Random House family.
Yeah, it's interesting how similar and yet different the covers are.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting. I think they try to retain the central element because it hits so many of the sort of ideas in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But It also feels slightly less imposing, which I think feels right for a paperback. Feels like, oh, pick me up. I'm a little cheaper and I'm a little more accessible than hardcover. I don't know. I think it works really well. I like both covers a lot.
Yeah, but especially that nice little gold embossed
Yeah, that's
logo
pretty
in the upper right, which really doesn't suit the artwork, but who cares? Yeah, I'm still marveling over that. That's so wonderful. So we're, by the way, about ready to take questions from people, and I see that a couple are just starting to come in, but I have one of my own before I take others, which is, since we were writing about your TV work,
right.
and you have all these short stories from 2 collections and 2 novels, one of which, you know, if we were just pondering, I could say, who would you like to direct blankety blank blank? But since it could be a reality for you, I can't really ask that. Well, when I interviewed Susanna Clark on the publication of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, we could say, oh, let's get Bob Hoskins or something like that, because it was all fantasy casting, you know, and who should direct it. But I assume pretty much all of your work has been optioned at this point.
Not quite all of it, but a few, yeah, a number of things have been optioned and are in various stages of development, but pretty much to the early side. You know, nothing is in production. I'm actually working on Interior Chinatown myself for Hulu, so I'm trying to figure out how to turn that into a series. If anyone has any suggestions, please help me. I need help.
How many hours do you think it would be?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, it's the idea is that it would be an ongoing series, but I think that means different things now, right? I mean, in a time when a season could be 6 episodes, right? And you might have a show that runs a couple, 3, 4 seasons, and that feels like, well, that's. I feel like the answer is however much it takes to tell the story. Probably not 100 hours. I'll say that. Probably not that. But.
Not 10 seasons or so. But it's interesting because we were talking about Legion earlier, which went 3 seasons.
Right.
As I recall. And each season closer was like an act. So you had Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And Noah Hawley, one can especially see that with his Fargo series, doesn't seem to mind so much how many episodes he will have in the season. He's very flexible about that.
I wonder, I mean, I just love that about, I think he doesn't feel, it seems like he just wants to make things that, I don't know if it's conscious, but to like break the rules of, you know, whatever the form is. So he made it, like Legion was a superhero show that didn't, I mean, technically, right? It is a superhero show, and yet it's not, right? It's like unlike any other version of Marvel character I've ever seen. So
yeah, that and WandaVision are the 2 that are really breaking molds.
Yeah. I think WandaVision is so innovative and just so cool, and all the actors are so good too. It's just what they're doing. On the one hand, I'm like, I don't want it to ever end. On the other hand, I'm like, how will they keep doing? Like, what will season 5 of this be? Or maybe it won't go that long. I don't know. But it's really innovative.
Well, I think it will, and it won't go that long, because I think what will happen is they will finish telling the story of the series, and we don't even know who will be alive at the end of the series. Not that it matters, because they've got a series coming up with Loki. Well, he's dead. Or actually, he's not. I rewatched Endgame, and he's not dead. He remember, he grabbed the cube and disappeared.
Oh yeah. So he's not dead.
So he's not dead.
Okay.
And he's got his own TV series coming.
Right.
So I think what will happen is when WandaVision ends, another part of whatever story is coming up for phase 4 will happen in the Winter Soldier series.
Mm.
And they're doing a grand weave. One of the interesting things about Legion is you don't ever have to have watched X-Men or read Chris Claremont,
Right.
Although everybody should. He's a friend.
Oh.
In order to get stuff out of Legion, it was fairly self-contained. And WandaVision started out self-contained, but by now, if you know nothing about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you're probably lost.
Yeah, right. Right.
So even if they do end it, the story will go on. But back to your writing.
I don't want to talk about. I keep talking about WandaVision because it's pretty.
Yeah, right.
It's just, I mean, how can you not? What they're doing is so interesting. I'll just say one more thing, but you know, it's your show, Jim. Please talk about whatever you want as long enough.
Actually, it's yours. I'm just talking too much.
No, I mean, to be weaving a television show into a universe that's mostly been movies to this point. I mean, almost exclusively. It's just really neat. How does that work? Is it like some huge committee somewhere that has to oversee it, you know, from like a continuity / narrative plotting perspective? Or I imagine it is some version of that, that they have like a meta room that oversees all of the writers' rooms. I don't know though.
Yeah, it's something along those lines. Obviously, one person pulls it over all together. And at Disney, that would be Kevin Feige,
right.
If I'm pronouncing it correctly. And then they have a committee, to use the word you brought up, that's the television group versus the movie group, although the movie group right now, I think, is scratching their heads and saying, okay, when are we going to see 300 people in the room again?
Right. Yeah.
So I think they're being very sharp in moving stuff over to both, in a way, it's a shorter form because you have these different half hours, and it's a longer form because you can tell an arc in 10 episodes, and then you can come back a season later with another arc.
Yeah.
So that's a delightful thing that's happening, is that molds are being broken. And it's, you know, one of the few good things to come out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right on the cusp of year 2, by the way, Year of the Plague.
Yeah.
Number 2. Since here we are in late February. We do have a couple of questions here. Amy, at her controls, saying, obviously the search for and desire to connect with one's father, is an important theme for you. Can you discuss that?
Yeah. Thanks, Amy, and whoever the questioner was. You know, not to make it sound like therapy, but I think for whatever reason, from the first stories that I was writing, there were always, on some level, about, you know, the most fundamental to me, the most fundamental parts of life, the relationships between parent and child. And at first, when I was writing them, I was a lot younger, so I was writing from the kid's perspective or from the son's perspective, and I just found myself, you know, writing about, you know, either missing fathers or loving fathers, or, and same with mothers. I just found myself writing a lot of stories about. I also found myself writing about people that were at the margins. Like my first book was called Third Class Superhero, and
Right.
it's about what it sounds like. Well, that's actually the title story. That's a short story, but it was one of the first stories I wrote, and then I wrote a novel about a time machine repairman. So often people who had sort of like what you would think of as sort of odd jobs or off to the side, not traditional protagonists, not heroic in a sense. Um, and I think for me, that was another way of kind of writing around um, ideas of like roles and where people fit in. And I think some of that also came from my parents' perspective. They immigrated from Taiwan in the 60s. And I think that was really a big influence on my writing, was just sort of growing up as a kid, seeing, what it took for them to try to make a life here in this country and become Americans. And now, in the last few years since becoming a dad, I think I now write from more of a midlife perspective, where I've got like parents on one side, kids on the other side. I'm a husband, just sort of like all of these roles that I try to play to the best of my ability. So yeah, I think that, but specifically about the father, I think my dad was just a really big influence on me. I just really admire him, but also, like a lot of people, pretty scared of him growing up, like intimidated, and he was mysterious, so I try to, I guess that works its way in there somehow.
Is he still around?
Yeah,
Are
they're
your
both
parents still
around. They're, getting up there, but they're around, and I still talk to them often. Haven't seen them in months and months.
Well, nobody's seen
Yeah,
anybody
that's it. Yeah,
outside of
doing
Zoom,
that. So
or which is becoming a generic word. We're not using Zoom yet. Here we are. So it's sort of, I'm just wondering what it would be like from his perspective, that you were writing about him, and now that writing is award winning, not just award winning, but a major award. No offense to the Hugos or the Nebulas, but National Book Award is there with Man Booker and all that. That's a cool thing.
I think he's very proud. He and my mom are both really proud. I think they're very honest with me too. They don't always get. They just say like, I don't think I get it, but I mean they usually do get it, but often there are parts of things where they're like, I can't quite access this. Well, those are my words. They wouldn't put it that way. They'd more just like, what are you saying here? And also, is this supposed to be me? It's that tricky thing for a fiction writer of, yes, it is, but it isn't. Like I don't write biography or autobiography really, even though I have named characters after myself. Like, it's which I don't recommend doing, because that really is danger zone for your family and friends. But I think things start from personal experience, emotionally, psychologically, and then you just take that and work with it as your raw materials to make fiction out of. So I I warned them up front years ago when things started getting published, like, it's not you, believe me, even though it seems like you, it's not you. But now I think everyone knows better, and they're like, yeah, maybe it's not, but you're also borrowing heavily from my life. So
Yeah. Even though it's not that person, it's part of your life experience. So that's how that counts. Jim Ryan asks, in the event that the options on your work don't get out of development hell, having done stuff on Marvel and Crichton, this is a great question. Who else's adaptations would you like to be in the writer's room for?
ooh, wow.
That's a great question.
Oh, that is a great question. So was Amy's. I realized that was actually Amy's question about fathers in my writing. So thanks for that, Amy. Wow. So if I'm understanding James' question, this is if ABC network, well, ABC actually is a network. If XYZ network called up and said, we're working on an adaptation of this, would you like to be in the room for it? Or would you like to come interview? That's like, what would my dream be to write for? Is that right?
Yeah, but I would also think just in the, oh, let's look at the books over there. Ooh, I'd like to pitch that as a series.
Oh, right.
Whose work might you pull from? Well, and let's not limit it to books.
Yeah. Well, starting with books, and this is not an abstract thing because I think it has been in development multiple times. I think Asimov's Foundation series would be, I think people have tried to do it. I don't know.
I think it's been done in England and should be airing within the year.
Really?
I think so.
Well, there we go. So cross that one off the list, I guess.
It's been done as radio 3 times. That counts for me. But
Yeah, it counts.
yeah, but it doesn't have the same kind of an audience. But yeah, I do believe that Foundation has been done. Whether it's going to be any good, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't really seen any good Asimov adaptations, have we? iRobot, no.
Yeah, it depends on where you set the bar for good.
Yeah. Nightfall was awful.
I don't think I saw that.
Yeah, do yourself a favor and keep it that way. It was a Canadian movie.
Let's see what else. I mean, what's amazing to me is that we actually have like Jeff Vandermeer adaptation. It's amazing to me that actually happens because to me it's so mind blowing. It seems like not unfilmable, just he's such a wild, inventive writer. It's so ambitious to actually tackle it.
Yeah, and we have a movie from a really great movie from an unadaptable short story by Ted Chiang.
Right. Like
that happened also.
Yeah, I mean, it's no coincidence that those both happened, within the last few years. I think that we're in an age where that's just possible. I mean, I think that's really exciting to me. I'm struggling. What else would be interesting? I don't know. I'm gonna keep thinking. Maybe I can tap dance while I think to sort of.
Yeah, and you can always come back. This will be archived on both YouTube and on Facebook, but Facebook has the better group chat thing, and you can come. We're going to be leaving this interview up, so you can go in there and type 2 months from now and say, I just thought of something.
Yeah, I might. There is a book by Jonathan Lethem, As She Climbed Across the Table. One of early.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, it's set in Berkeley. It's kind of it's a love story between two researchers. One in kind of a science role. She works up at like the laboratory with like particle physics, and the man is like a interdisciplinary guy. And it's just this great setup with this central metaphor of like a kind of bubble universe. It's just this great relationship story. I don't think it's ever been done, but
well, apparently it has been in one way, which I had forgotten, and that is, as Amy types in, when she was the curator of this reading series.
Wow.
He read from it for this reading series.
That's impressive that like in real time we're having fact checking. I like it.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of the great things about doing this and having a staff in the background.
Yeah.
So three of us, it's a very useful kind of a thing. By the way, we'll remind people that if you have any questions for Charles Yu, you can go onto Facebook or YouTube where this is occurring, assuming that you're not watching this recorded, and we'll be happy to answer the questions. I had another question or did I distract myself? Yeah, well, we were on. Oh, it's just that you mentioned Jonathan Lethem in adaptations. I have to say that I went to a preview when it was before it had come out of the movie Motherless Brooklyn, which is not at all like the book.
That's what I've heard. I have read the book, but I have not seen the movie yet.
I loved the movie. I thought it was very, very different, but it struck a lot of the same chords. And I seem to be the only one. The movie bombed. It got some terrible reviews. It was, pretty much a one-person project for Edward Norton.
Okay.
Because he produced, wrote, and starred
I see.
in the film. It's his film from beginning to end. And he did that adaptation. And apparently clearing the stuff with Jonathan, like, is it okay if we change the era and stuff like that. And when I left the theater, I really, really remember leaving theaters. I really, really liked it. And when it came out a month later and it got small reviews, back page type reviews, the 4 paragraphs. And many of them were pens. So I don't get that one because I thought it may not have been completely faithful, but it had the feel of a Jonathan Lethem work.
It's interesting. It was such a major book. And obviously Edward Norton has been in and made some really major movies too. So for it to not get more attention, I kind of remember it sort of came and went relatively quick. I guess it's also a function of the pandemic, right? Because it didn't come out. When did it come out? Last fall?
Fall before last.
Oh, okay. It was. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and because I was able to go to a screening room and see it.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, and that was before award season. So, yeah, I think it was like, 5 months or so before the pandemic. But it opened before the pandemic. It just somehow got ignored. It's on one of those, either HBO or one of the streamers now. It can be seen.
Okay. Good to know. I think he's such a. He's one of my, one of the people I read when I was trying to write and try to basically, you could say, steal from or learn from. I don't know. So,
well, that might be one of my last questions. Is who are the writers who told you that you wanted to be a writer? Who were the first people you were reading that influenced you, and why speculative fiction?
I remember reading a Richard Powers novel in college. And the way that he blended, science. It wasn't even really science fiction in a way. I mean, it was really that he seemed to be writing in a kind of scientific sphere and yet told a very emotional story. I remember just thinking, wow. And I wasn't even thinking of writing then. I did, I minored in creative writing in college, but I actually was writing poetry. Uh, I I really like poetry, and was just writing poetry. I didn't. So it wasn't with an eye towards writing fiction. I just was, I read him. I read Jonathan Lethem. When I graduated from law school, I started reading George Saunders a lot,
Mm.
picking up his first two books, Pastoralia and Civil War Land and Bad Decline. That's opposite order. But those were his first two books, and being struck by the voice and the tone and how strange it was, how it felt. One, it just felt like it didn't feel like the stuff I had read in school ever. It just felt like, oh, this is literature, but it's I don't know. It's speaking in a voice that doesn't sound like covered in dust, right? It sounded like it spoke to me as a 25-year-old who didn't know anything and hadn't read enough books. I was like, I can access this. At least I felt like I could. I think it's deceptive in how hard it is to actually make something sound so conversational. Like he has just this incredible gift that to make things sound friendly but actually carry so much humor and sadness. And so I read a lot of him. Trying to think of who else. I remember reading Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist early on.
Ooh.
Again, a kind of central metaphor that feels speculative, I think.
Hmm.
Well, it is, but and
Yeah, I don't feel the
I don't know
need
what
to
I'm saying.
pigeonhole anything, and it's attributed to Damon Knight, but the Damon Knight definition of science fiction is what I'm pointing at,
That's excellent. Yeah.
and I like that one. So if it's horror, if it's this or that, if it's speculative fiction, which was actually a term coined by Heinlein in the 40s to mean what we today call hard science fiction, and now it
Right.
means almost the opposite. I don't care.
Yeah.
I call it all science fiction. Lord of the Rings, just to upset everybody out there.
You just started many conversations.
Yeah, well, but the audience is a similar audience. And it all belongs to this larger fantasy genre, which we can then subdivide forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But why people choose that genre is, I guess, what prompts me asking you and all the other people I get to interview that question is, why spec fic?
There's a honest answer, and then there's like a answer designed to try to make me sound smarter than I am. So I don't know. I'll give you both.
Okay.
The fake smarty pants answer is like it's by writing about not just what is actual or empirical, writing about adjacent possible universes, just a much bigger category of things you get to write about, and you have much more perspective on reality. I don't know that reality has to be encompassed by one sort of. I think what you would call realism is itself a genre, right? It's the genre of nothing super interesting is going to happen in the story. So, and so there, but I think the real answer is I couldn't not do it. When I first started writing things, they just came out the way they did, and whatever combination of video games, comic books, sci-fi, fantasy, and other things that I had read up to that point in my life, just, you know, uh, they synthesized into some weird mixture of whatever it is that I'm extruding in my fiction pellets. That's a pretty gross. I don't know why I went there with the metaphor, but
No, but it's good because, like we were talking about before, it means that you're not
yeah,
planning what genre, what kind of writing. It's just going to be
yeah,
what flows.
exactly. And yeah, that's it.
Well, I think that wraps up a wonderful hour. And all I can do is say, A, I hope we get to do this again.
So do I.
Even better in person. And B, the next question, well, I don't think my mind had the capacity for more than one question there. Oh yes, just continued success. My gosh,
Thank you.
you know, it was pretty good before, but now it just went into another realm, and I couldn't be happier for you or more thrilled.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. I hope we get to talk again, and well, let's plan on it. I hope well, if I ever finish writing another thing, which, knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, I figure people are going to be coming to you with assignments if you don't have your own idea. Just a vague impression. So thank you, Barbara Krasnoff, for engineering, Amy Goldschlager for wrangling the questions. And next month, Karen Russell, and after that, Alana C. Meyer. And again, thank you, Charles Yu.
Thanks so much, Jim. It was really a pleasure.
Okay, so we'll see you all soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.